think it's breaking down a little bit, but there is this idea that runners, if you eat too much, people are going to look at you, and that's a load of crap. It depends on what you're training and how your metabolism is.
This is Running for Real, the podcast for runners who know that for every runner's high, there are just as many lows. All those just missed PRs, easy runs that feel hard, injury blues, and more. Each week, we'll talk to running, health, and wellness experts about their highs, lows, and best advice to build our confidence. Running for Real is about being honest, being brave, and most of all, not feeling alone. And now here's our host, who for 10 years rode horses before stopping to focus on her running, Tina Muir.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to episode 57 of the Running for Real podcast. I am really excited that you are here today, and this is going to be an interesting one for you. So last week I had Ali Kiefer on the show. I know many of you are huge Ali fans. She's most recently known for kind of breaking out and running a 2:29 marathon in the New York City Marathon, finishing second American behind Shalane. But she's also known for kind of going against the norm when it comes to feeling the pressure to be a certain weight. We had a good conversation about race weight and how, trying to get to a certain weight is really not going to help you. And it's best for you to just find what works for you. So if you missed that one, be sure to go check that one out. Now, a few weeks ago, I interviewed Alex Hutchinson about his new book, Endure. And that was talking about the concept of mental toughness, the ability to push ourselves. And many of you might be reading that book right now after the recommendations in the interview. And Alex talked about a few experts who gave him insights into the various parts of the book. One of the names that stuck out to me was someone who I knew was one of the best nutritional experts out there. I know you're going to love to learn about performance nutrition, and Alex was kind enough to introduce me to my guest today. So Trent Stellingwerff is on the show today. He has a lot of research studies behind him, and he loves to learn more. He learns from the best in the world, finds out what works for them, and then he gives the insight back to us. Now, the last few episodes, I have told you about my podcast series and how I'm technically kind of sponsoring myself for the second sponsor slot. Body Health is still there as always, but I wanted to let you know about the nutritional podcast series that I am selling now, and I hope you will enjoy it. So in case you missed the previous episodes this month, in January, 3 days before my daughter was born, little did I know, that week I launched the Running for Real podcast series, which are 6 specific podcast series on specific topics runners are interested in. Now, I worked really hard to chase down and bring in some of the best experts out there to really give you a helpful guide to go along with it. I bullied my guests into giving some exclusive information in that guide and sharing some information in the interview that you may not have heard them say elsewhere. Now, I have to tell you, I was really proud of them by the end, but it was just a shame I never got the chance to really share about them other than in the Superstars community. So the topics of these series are beginners, coming back from injury, marathon, nutrition, pregnancy and postpartum, and mental training. Now, each one contains 5 to 7 episodes of specific, direct, to-the-point interviews with some of the best experts in the world, along with that guide I mentioned earlier. So today, it only makes sense to talk about the nutritional podcast series. Now, navigating the nutritional world can be incredibly confusing, and that's why I wanted to take all of the viewpoints about nutrition and put them in one place, where we can hear what they have to say and come to a conclusion in what works for us using their advice. So I asked all those questions that we want to know, including how do I know if I'm eating enough for my training? There's so many temptations all around. How can I avoid eating these bad foods? What are the best recovery foods? I have a sweet tooth. I can't stop eating sweets. What should I do? How to burn fat for fuel? How long does it take for your body to adapt to burning fat? How to find the right weight for you? How to avoid bonking? And is there a best diet? There's a whole lot more questions in there, and each one is focused on a specific area of nutrition to help us all understand nutrition enough to actually be able to implement this advice to get it right for ourselves. You can find out more in the show notes at tinamuir.com/episode 57 or by visiting tinamuir.com/running-nutrition-series. So that's enough from me. After a quick word from Body Health, we will be right to the episode. Have you tried Body Health Perfect Amino yet? They were a vital part in making sure I recovered during my heavy training as an elite runner. And guess what? Now I'm back to running. So are they back in my cycle. So I am really excited to have them back. You can find out how you can get 10% off and just what they can do for you later in the show. Trent, thank you so much for joining me today on the Running for Real podcast. I am really excited to talk to you today. And, I've got a bit of a fun question to get started with. So this is maybe catch you off guard, but you might not even know what I'm talking about. But firstly, thank you so much for joining me. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks a lot for having me, and I appreciate being on your show.
Oh no, this is fun, and I read about you firstly in Endure, Alex Hutchinson's new book, and then I started reading up on what you've been doing, and it was really interesting, and I knew the listeners would love to learn more about this. But before we get into the kind of nutrition performance side of things, I do have a question. You worked, for Nestle in their research center. Now, I know you were in a different branch, but do you know what a Milky Bar is?
I do know what a Milky Bar is,
Did
yes.
you get a lot of Milky Bars when you worked for Nestle?
So this is crazy. I don't even like chocolate.
Oh, my God. I don't know how
Interview's over.
Yeah. Ending here. You don't like chocolate?
My wife likes chocolate, but I'm more of a my vice would be potato chips, more of a savory kind of guy.
Okay, yeah. That's fine. I will allow you to have that. Although I do know Nestle does make lots of savory foods as well. I know that here in Kentucky they make Hot Pockets. I know the Americans know what those are, but one of my good friends is one of the line managers there. But so I just was wondering about the Milky Bars, but you've destroyed my question by saying you don't like chocolate. I was just, as soon as anyone says Nestle, that's what comes to my mind because it's my favorite chocolate or favorite candy in the world. So I'm
at the time I was the innovation and research director for Power Bar, which Nestle had owned at the time. So I was much more into sport and exercise research. Yeah.
And they do not anymore. Is that what you're saying?
No, it's been sold to Post Holdings. Okay. So Post also, they're most famous for their cereals.
Okay. Very interesting. All right. Well, we'll go into that in a second. But before we kind of go into your career and what you've been able to accomplish, I want to talk about your collegiate career. Now, you ran in the US for Cornell, which many people will know that school. And as this is a question I get asked all the time, so I know people will be interested, why go to school in the US when you are from Canada?
Yeah, so I am turning 42 soon, so I'm not a spring chicken anymore. And certainly when I was going through high school and I graduated, it was 1996. And the context in Canada was a bit different than it is now. Canada has exploded in terms of the university sport and the quality of the indoor championships were just last weekend, the U Sport championships. Canada can now offer scholarships to athletes, albeit not full ride scholarships. But in '96, when I came through, the quality of the league for athletics for track and field wasn't where it is now, and there were no scholarships. And so a lot of, if not the majority of Canada's best track and field runners and athletes would generally go south.
Oh, so that was a very common thing to do at the time. Okay.
Absolutely, yeah. And it was you would look at different options. Some would stay back in Canada, but the vast majority of the higher ranked athletes would go south. And so, I made all my recruiting visits. I went to different spots, and I was academically pretty strong, and Cornell checked a lot of boxes for me.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's very interesting. And would you say, so you said, about the improvements that you've seen in Canadian sports and just the way that, people have access to it. But so would you say the number of US runners coming over here has decreased, or, is it just as high, but maybe there's more runners now than there used to be?
So you mean Canadian runners coming to the US?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. You said US runners coming over here.
Sorry.
I was like, oh.
Yeah. No. Sorry. I meant Canadian.
Yeah. Just so everyone knows, she's sitting in the US. I'm sitting in Canada. Mm-hmm. So it's so I would say that overall, the rank, I work for Athletics Canada as a director of sports science, sports medicine. And so overall, I would say that the high school rankings are stronger. But I would say that there is a more significant chunk of athletes opting to stay in Canada. There's some pros and cons to that. The Canadian university program doesn't have an outdoor season. And in some ways that's a pro, because then the second element to that is the Canadian university system. Most universities support a very strong club system like you would have in Britain. The club system in the US is really almost non-existent. And so most university programs also have a club program that's affiliated with them.
Okay.
And I think not having to race outdoors in your university system gives you a lot of options. If you need a break, you can take a break and get ready for a proper build for cross country. If you do want to compete outdoors, you still can. You can still go to the Stanford, Peyton Jordan Invite and things like this, but you're going to go via your club system. I think it's better for long-term athlete development because as a distance runner, you're not hooked onto 3 seasons, grinding it out year round, trying to peak 3 times, which is probably impossible.
And then pretty much getting 2 weeks off, and then you have to start building up for cross country again.
Totally. Yeah. And so I think there's a lot of positives to that. And so a lot of athletes now opt to stay in Canada. And most university coaches, as I said before, are club coaches, but they also are okay with a lot of athletes going home to their home club in the summer and competing for their home club and their home coach. And so I see a lot of positives there. Now, there's some great schools in the U.S. and there's great schools in Canada, and there's some probably dreadful schools in the U.S. and there's dreadful schools in Canada, and you just got to do your homework. Yeah. I'm not biased one way or the other.
Okay. Well, interesting. Thank you for sharing. Now, you made quite a few mistakes in college. This is the last thing I want to ask you about your history, and you've been quite open about talking about them. So, trying to show others not to make those same mistakes. So what would you like to tell any new runners listening based on your career as a runner yourself?
Yeah, I think I had this mythical idea that I could do 3 or 4 or 5 things exceptionally well concurrently. Yep. And so when I went to Cornell, and Cornell's a pretty tough school academically, and I was in the pre-med stream and the hard sciences, and I thought, there's no reason why I can't do Dean's Lists while running absolutely full out and to the highest level of success and actually put in the dedication required for that. One, I didn't really know what was involved there until later, while having a social life and a part-time job. And when I say a social life, I absolutely overdid it. At the time I was like, if I go out 3 or 4 nights a week till 1 or 2 in the morning, I can handle that. And I probably did push that hard for 3 or 4 years of my life. And I had some flashes of brilliance during my career, but it was inconsistent. It was fleeting. I had a fair amount of injuries, a lot of illnesses. And then finally in my 3rd year of university, my back just gave out. I ended up with 2 herniated discs. And I think it was mainly a product of poor lifestyle choices. My family doesn't have a history of back problems. I would sleep where I landed if the party was the night before, and then get up and go. And I had this huge capacity, and I still have a big capacity, but now I just focus it in on a few things rather than thinking I can do everything to the top level. So
what were the lessons learned there? Yeah.
Oh God. Yeah. And to summarize, I try to tell athletes, like, on any time of the year, you can probably only focus in on 2 things. And it might be school and running. And then maybe at another time of the year when running's a little less important, maybe then it's school and job or school and girlfriend. But you kind of have to periodize these things throughout the year.
And it still kind of is the same, even as you go beyond college and onwards. I know a lot of people listening have full-time jobs. So maybe you can handle, really dedicating to your running and a full-time job. But you probably, if you throw kids in there as well, balancing those 3 is going to be really tough. So like Trent says, pick 2. And sometimes, unfortunately, maybe if you do have kids and a job, then the running is going to have to kind of take a back seat because it's just not possible. And yeah, that's a great lesson to learn and something that we all think we can be the one to be the exception to the rule, but in reality, we can't. So I want to ask you about, that work we mentioned in Nestle at the research center. You were the senior research scientist in sport, nutrition, energy, and performance. So tell us, what did your job involve there? What developments were you working on at the time?
Sure. Yeah. So the Nestle Research Center is a standalone research institute based in Lausanne, Switzerland. The business headquarters for Nestle was about 20 kilometers, 12 miles away for the U.S. visitors. So the research center had about 600 of us there. It had a real university feel. There was about 50 nationalities there on any given year. So it was very international. It had different departments, just like a university. And the group that I was involved in was called Physical Performance and Mobility. Okay. And so two of us, we looked at physical performance throughout the lifespan. So from children to peak athletes all the way to healthy aging. And mobility meant we also had 5 people in our research group that just focused on bone and bone health. Mm-hmm. I'm not a bone expert at all, but through association of working with them for 5 years, I certainly picked up a lot of that. Mm-hmm. Most of the work that I did specifically was most focused on peak performance, meaning working with a brand like PowerBar to design research, to design in-house research that would be published, or collaborative research around the world. So we would also collaborate with a lot of labs like Asker Ukendrup in Birmingham or Louise Burke in Australia as 2 examples, to just look at the way nutrition and exercise interacted to optimize either adaptation to training or peak performance on race day. Mm-hmm. And it was a neat time of my life. I learned a lot about how big business works. I was able to create a lot of collaborations and friends throughout that period that I'm still in close contact with. And they're a lot of those people are my mentors now for my own research career.
Mm-hmm. And with just going deeper into that, you said about, working PowerBar and testing and creating, research studies. Is this literally kind of like collecting up subjects, having them, this latest PowerBar or whatever it is product that you had created or someone had created for performance nutrition, testing it out with these people? Like what specifics did you do on a day-to-day basis?
Sure, you bet. So some of it was just that. You've nailed it on the head. So sometimes it'd be a new formulation of a gel or a power bar that we were going to fast track and trial on a group of triathletes just to get initial feedback on taste and gastrointestinal tolerance. In other instances, at the time, PowerBar was getting much more into the space of protein, and they wanted to look at protein from a recovery standpoint. So the brand in PowerBar Europe, they have whey protein products and a lot of other products that are in the US. So in those situations, we might collaborate with a lab and do a full-blown study at a university where there's muscle biopsies and tracers, and we're measuring muscle protein synthesis. And so it's a real combination of things. Probably one of the things that I'm most proud of during that period was very early on, we saw the results on a supplement. It's an amino acid called beta-alanine, which is a high-intensity hydrogen ion buffer used for middle distance type events. And at the time, Professor Roger Harris, he was also the guy that figured out creatine. 15 years earlier, had come out with a couple of studies on beta-alanine. And so I was involved in 2 or 3 studies there, and then the launch of PowerBar beta-alanine, which still exists to this day.
Cool. Yeah, that's really exciting. And I'm sure quite a lot of people listening do take beta-alanine in some form, or, maybe even supplements. I know Alex has talked about that in the past when I've interviewed him, Alex Hutchinson, that is. And then, as you've kind of come on and you've continued with your career, you've more specialized, more and more into performance nutrition. Now, I know this is such a big open topic and could go in a million directions, but I know listeners will just want to know from your research, from things you've done yourself, from things you've seen, is there a best way to eat? We hear about paleo, low carb, high carb, all these different diets, quote unquote. What is the best way for performance for someone who just wants to know that, I know it's a can of worms question, but just wants to know that.
There's no such thing as a perfect singular diet. It just doesn't exist. And anyone who says it is should be an automatic red flag. There's so much nuance and context involved with nutrition that's dependent on the person's individual background, their genetics, the type of exercise and training they're doing, their individual responses to the diet. So, one classic example is if I showed you the salt requirements of say a hockey goalie, those guys sweat a lot. And we've measured in one practice 11 grams of salt loss in one goalie.
Wow.
That's 8 times over the RDI, recommended daily intake. And so if you just blinded this name at the top of the report and you showed most nutritionists, RDs or professionals, the type of salt required to keep this guy up and going, they would think that this is an insanely unhealthy diet without understanding that he's losing 8 times over the RDI daily in practice. And so everything is context specific. There's continuums to everything, whether it's macronutrients or micronutrients. And unfortunately, that's always lost in the limited word count on Twitter, where there's all sorts of nuance. The other, I'll make 2 other quick points here. And just so everyone knows, accurately measuring energy intake and accurately measuring energy expenditure is like trying to measure rain in a hurricane. It is so hard to do. And I think that there's a nuance there. Unless you're using double labeled water, which is a really expensive tracer methodology to exercise expenditure, it's, from dietary and exercise recording, it is fraught with over and under reporting and miscalculations. So that's something to consider as well in this field. That it's just challenging and it's difficult, but I love it. And then the third element is that, and this is where people get really passionate. Food is part of who they are. It's their background. It's how they meet with friends. If you're European, it is probably one of the strongest links to your culture. When you think about Italy, you think about certain foods. When you think about Germany, you automatically think about different foods. And so people are really passionate about their diet and why it works for them and how therefore it should automatically work for everyone. And that's rarely the case. So, I'll get off my soapbox now. But
no. That's exactly what we want to hear. And I'm going to dive into some of those points a bit more. Now, you mentioned the calorie tracking. That's something that is really big, and particularly with runners wanting to either lose weight or kind of keep, at a certain race weight. We hear about this a lot. Now, you said that, the tracking is really inaccurate. So would you say it's so inaccurate that people shouldn't even bother trying to track their nutrition because, you said under and over reporting, it's just what they see on that package is just not even in the ballpark? Is that what you're saying?
So I think what you see on the package is different than longitudinally trying to accurately track your caloric intake. I think it's really important to understand the caloric differences on packages and different foods just to have a sense.
Okay.
That should be part of just nutrition 101 training. There's 5 to 6 times more calories in a handful of jujubes than a handful of broccoli.
What are jujubes?
Oh, jujubes is like a gummy bear. Sorry, like candy. Yeah, candy.
Okay, I've never heard of that before. So it's okay.
Maybe that's a Canadian.
The Canadians
right?
will know what that means.
Yeah.
Okay, continue.
And so understanding what's in your nutrition, not just from a caloric perspective, but from a health perspective, is really really important, and I would encourage that. The tricky bit is that we know, from a health perspective, from an adaptation perspective, as little as 300 calories a day can make a major and significant impact on health. So skipping breakfast or having a breakfast that's too small, for example. But we can't measure, because of the variability, that small 300 calories a day. But if you take 300 calories and multiply by 365, that's a month worth of eating at the end of the year. So of course it's going to make an impact. Of course your body's not going to respond as well to training, and your energy availability is going to go down, and your bone health may suffer accordingly. And so it's very small differences in nutrition that can make a profound impact, but they're so small that we have a hard time tracking it accurately. So long story short is it is very rare that I try to calorically track with any athlete I ever work with. We will have them do maybe a few days of dietary recording, but I use that primarily just to look at how they eat throughout the day. How do they structure their eating around their life demands and their training, just to optimize the timing of nutrition. I'm actually not using it as much for any analysis. And we'll use secondary markers to look at whether they're eating enough, and whether or not they're spreading their calories enough. So those secondary markers might be things like like body weight or body composition. There might be training stability or variability. It might be menstrual cycle status, for example. It might be testosterone in males if we have that kind of a budget to track that. Mm-hmm. So we use a lot of secondary markers to create a whole package to try and tease out any of these dietary impactors.
Okay. And then, so, what you just said there, and then a few minutes ago, you were talking about, someone skipping breakfast or, how they spread their food out during the day. Now, I had Nancy Clark on here a few months ago, and I kind of talked about how I'd worked with her about, spreading my calories out better during the day so it wasn't so heavily loaded at night. Now, what has your research, or what have you found about the importance of having calories throughout the day rather than just kind of having a lot at night? And then, related to that, people often think that when it comes to performance, well, all I need to worry about is the food I eat immediately before I run. But what have you found, about the rest of the day in that sense as well?
So I'll start that with a couple of things. There's a recent paper that came out about 2 months ago out of Norway, in the Olympic Research Center there, Top Sporten are one of the global leaders on energy availability. And they had a great paper that came out. And I think Alex Hutchison actually blogged about it 2 weeks ago. And it comes out of Anna Milan's group, looking at spreading your calories equally throughout the day rather than back-end loading. And in that paper, they also had that 300 or 400 calorie deficit cutoff. Mm-hmm. And we have to remember there's an 8 to 10 hour period every day that you sleep, that there's a long fast going on. And so for me, breakfast is one of the most important meals to consider, but it's probably one of the least appreciated meals by most people. And so if you don't do breakfast right, you can very instantly be in quite a caloric deficit for a long period of time because of that long fast that you've just come out of. And so that paper actually showed significant reductions in performance outcomes, but most specifically health parameters in athletes. So the two groups where they ate the same amount of calories, it's just one group spread them equally throughout the day, and the other group had poor distribution where they were in a deficit after breakfast, and the number of injury rates were much higher in the group that had the deficit over time. And a whole host of other health parameters were not what you would hope. And
can I just pause you? Were they doing any exercise during this time?
Yeah, so these were pretty elite athletes. So
were they probably running in the morning then? So maybe not eating before they ran? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, correct. Okay. Or even then, because they're at a deficit, if they train in the afternoon, that exercise then puts them in even more of a deficit. And you're spending lots and lots of hours in under a 300 or 400 calorie deficit, which has now been shown to slowly add up and increase your risk for stress fractures and bone health and some of these other outcomes associated with what most people think are overeating disorders. And it's not. It's just, maybe they're a university athlete who is busy and is just not conscious of spreading their calories throughout the day. That's not an eating disorder. That's just optimizing your eating. And so we now call it RED-S. It used to be female athlete triad, but now it's called REDS, which is relative energy deficit in sport. And it captures both males and females, and it captures both health and performance outcomes. And so I actually think it's one of the biggest white elephants in the corner with a lot of issues that athletes have. It's just kind of subversive, just slightly under eating in certain contexts. And on any one day, it doesn't matter. But when it starts to happen over months and years, then bone health, injury, illness factors go up. GI symptoms, I think, are a huge issue on this. Iron status, like all this stuff that have to just deal with having adequate energy. So yeah, that's one bit of just spreading your calories throughout the day. And then I was on another series of papers in a collaboration with Australia, where we took protein and spread it equally throughout the day versus back-end loading protein. And
which is what people typically do, right? Having like the meat with dinner. Okay.
You are absolutely correct. So they'll take, a typical person might need 150 grams of protein throughout the day, and they'll have a steak and get 100 of it all at once at night. So they check their daily protein intake box, but they've done it in the least efficient way because your body can only assimilate so much protein at once. And it's about 20 grams every 4 hours. And the rest of it, you just oxidize and urinate out as expensive pee as nitrogen. Mm-hmm. And then at least in Western diet, one of the times that most people do not optimize their protein intake and get to that 15 to 25 gram level is breakfast. And so, usually a really easy fix is, okay, where's my breakfast at? Am I getting enough calories and is there enough protein in there? And just that implementation, that intervention right there is simple, but it's usually over time can be quite effective for people.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for sharing it. And Trent, I'm not sure if you know, I know most of the listeners probably know, you mentioned about Red S, and the reason I'm probably best known now is not from my running career. It's actually having amenorrhea for 9 years. So I'm not sure if you knew about that, but obviously you were speaking right to me because my calories in was obviously just slightly below where it should have been to not allow that to happen. So
no, I've read it. So
glad you mentioned it.
I will appreciate you sharing your story.
Thank you.
I know my wife and I go and we'll lecture together to athletes, and then usually as the two-time Olympian, she'll stay on and talk longer with the athletes. And we're both quite passionate about this area. And I think there's an entire special edition in the International Journal of Sports Nutrition and Exercise Metabolism on Red S that's coming out. I'm one of the associate editors for it. It's coming out in this summer. So stay tuned. There'll be 15 to 18 new papers on the topic.
Wow, okay.
All in one edition, yeah.
All right. Well, I would encourage everyone. I will get Trent's social media at the end of this, and I'm sure you'll be able to follow it and find out more if that is something that you are interested in, or, even anything performance nutrition related. We'll talk about that in a bit. Now, you've worked with, or currently work with, track and field teams who obviously include a lot of runners. Now, most people listening are either road runners, but they might do the odd track and field race. But what overall have you learned about nutrition and runners with the way that we kind of approach our eating compared with maybe other sports?
So last quad, I worked with our Olympic rowing program in Canada as well. And I also dabble a bit and work with cyclists as well. And I would say that the biggest thing is that, and maybe runners don't realize this, a really big running week is 10 to 12 hours. You just physically can't handle much more running than that. So even your Kenyan marathoners at 130 miles, 140 miles a week, it's still only 10 or 12 hours of running. Cyclists, swimmers, and rowers, their big training weeks are 25 to 30 hours for triathletes. Mm-hmm. And so what I'll say is that when you're training 25 to 30 hours a week and you're not taking in enough calories, it instantly hits you like a train wreck. And so runners tend to be a little more picky about their nutrition, a little more pedantic about things, because of the structural loading of running and the pounding and the neuromuscular load. However, on the flip side, they can get into trouble more quickly as well in terms of undereating. Because when you're a swimmer or you're a rower where the pounding's not there, then the stress fracture risk is relatively lower per hour training, a lot lower. So those are the big things that I see with runners. Like when you go to a training camp and you get off the plane with the rowers, with the runners, you get in your bags, you jump in the car, and you got to take the 2-hour drive up to Flagstaff or wherever you're going. With the rowers, everything stops, and you need to eat first. We just had a flight, so we got to eat, and then you're loading up the cars, and then you drive up into Flag, and you got to check into the hotel. No, we got to eat again.
I feel like I'm that way.
So now these are some big dudes I was working with, like, 6'5" and 200 plus pounds and 30-hour training weeks, but it was just so different. It was just such a different culture. And I think that there's this, I think it's breaking down a little bit, but there is this idea that runners, if you eat too much, people are going to look at you. And
definitely. Mm-hmm.
That's a load of crap. It depends on what you're training and how your metabolism is, and are you happy and healthy, and are you running well? Those are my two indicators that are step 1 and 2. Are you happy and healthy, and are you running well? Sure. So within runners, that's probably more of what I see because of that. because of that, runners will also have by far the most significant GI problems of any athlete group I work in. And I think it's slight undereating is associated with it, but it's also the jarring nature and the pounding and the jiggling of your GI tract that can play into having GI issues. Because you're upright, the relative exercise intensity, because you're weight loaded as a runner, is higher. So you get more blood shunting away from your GI tract compared to other sports. Doing a 6-hour ride on the bike because of the exercise, and you can have a sandwich mid-ride. You're not going to do that as a runner, right? So,
well, interesting. And definitely, I think we can agree with that. And I'm glad you said that, and especially about the GI distress, because I know a lot of people get very frustrated with it. And once again, brings home that message you said earlier about finding what works for you, based on your situation rather than kind of copying what everyone else is doing. And that ties into what you were saying about, runners and maybe slightly under eating, or like the pressure when you are out with people. There's a lot of comparison in running that I think maybe doesn't play in as much to other sports. Like, what are they doing rather than what am I doing? So thank you for explaining. And for people who are busy, they have full-time jobs, trying to juggle those three things we mentioned, probably shouldn't be doing. If they, take supplements and vitamins, how well does that, are they going to be okay to continue training just as well? Or is the real wholesome food, rather than taking, a vitamin C pill, is it going to make that much of a difference?
So I'm a food first type of person, and not just from, as a foodie or someone who likes food, but if we really think about evolutionary biology and how we've evolved as humans, there were no supplements until 20, 30, or 40 years ago. We evolved to eat food. And as we learn more and more about food, we realize it is actually incredibly complex. So within an apple, I think they've identified north of 200 or 300 different types of molecules in an apple already. They work synergistically together. Or an orange, they work synergistically together. So to take vitamin C out of an orange and multiply it by 12 times the amount to give it as an individual supplement, to me is counterintuitive to the way that food's been designed and evolved, just as we have as humans. There are a handful of times that a supplement, either a health supplement or an ergogenic aid supplement, might make sense. But in most instances, when I sit down with athletes, we're reducing their supplement list in half or by 3/4, and where they're going to look at trying to get that through food sources. If I look at, say, 2 hotbeds for track and field or for endurance in Kenya and Ethiopia, they're eating from the land about as natural as you can get in terms of the vegetable markets or the meat markets. Like literally the cow that you're going to eat is just walking by you. I think those are important considerations to have as well. I try to push that message forward.
Okay, great. Thank you for explaining that. Now, you have kind of a dream job for many people listening right now. They would love to kind of be in your situation and have done the things that you've done. But tell us, for those listening who are interested, curious in working in performance nutrition, what does a typical day in the life involve for you now, at your current point?
Yeah, so dream job is usually involves a 20 years of work and side steps and other side steps and, working to midnight on certain days to get there. And then even when you're within the dream job, I'm speaking to more millennials right here, right now. Even when you're in the dream job, there's a lot of days that you're in the trenches or I'm in front of a computer or it's not that sexy. But there are some days where I have been really blessed and honored to get some opportunities. I will say that I also knocked down my own doors to get those opportunities where, I get to go to a lot of neat championships and training camps and work with some of the most incredible DNA on the planet, both from a physical perspective, but also just incredible human beings, emotionally and psychologically, just great athletes. And so for me, I'm I work at the Canadian Sport Institute Pacific. We deal with 18 Olympic sports across 3 campuses. I'm in Victoria, but we have a campus in Vancouver and one up in Whistler for our winter sports. So 6 of our employees were just over at the Winter Games from Whistler. And then I primarily work with Athletics Canada, the track and field governing body, but I also work a little bit with triathlon and a little bit with mountain bike as kind of a senior endurance consultant. Mm-hmm. And I have a PhD. I'm not a registered dietitian. I have a PhD that mixes both physiology and nutrition. And so I'm a physiologist on the staff, but do a lot of work in the area of nutrition, but also work hand in hand with our registered dietitians, as their clinical knowledge and expertise and background is invaluable. I will stress that having a good RD is imperative, and
absolutely.
I do not work alone in nutrition. I have great people that I work alongside with. So yeah, it is a pretty cool job. And that said, 2012 Olympic year, I think I was away from home 225 days of the year.
Wow.
And so for some people that's tough. Now, some of it did overlap with my wife, who was getting ready for the London Olympics. But at a certain point, I had our Olympic rowers in Italy, and then I was up at St. Moritz with our runners, and then back and forth. And then the runners went to Germany. So then I was there, and the rowers then went into London early. So I left Germany early to go to London. And there was a 2.5 month stretch where I was, in my suitcase in Europe, working between 2 major sports. So, for some people, that's a little too demanding as well. But for me to be in St. Moritz with some of the best athletes in the world over a couple week period, that's not work for me. That's it's passion. So, I hope that describes it adequately.
That definitely explains it. And there's 2 questions I want to ask you from there. Firstly, I'm sure the listeners are dying to hear what it's like. You mentioned about your wife preparing for the London Olympics. Tell us a bit about her and what she does. Or, right now she is, by the time this goes live, we'll probably have given birth to your second child. But what was it like during, the build up, and what does she do?
Yeah, so for 10 or 12 years, she was a professional runner, middle distance runner, 1,500 meter specialty. Mm-hmm. After we got married in 2005, we moved to Netherlands, where I worked for a while, and then we moved to Switzerland. And I don't need to tell you, but the hotbed of athletics and track and field is in Europe, so it was perfect for her as well. And that was her job for about 12 years. During that 12 years, she did a master's in education and worked a little bit as a substitute teacher in Switzerland, but just very part-time. Mm-hmm. She's a 2-time Olympian, did the London Olympics, had a child, made it back to Rio. That was absolute insanity, but did it, and is now 36, retired, and is the assistant distance coach for the University of Victoria here in town. Mm-hmm. So that's a bit.
Thank you for sharing. And I will put some information about her in the show notes for if anyone wants to read up more. Now, the second question, having, a wife who is going through this, but also you mentioned working with some of the best DNA on the planet, some of the best runners. What have you seen all these best athletes, these Olympians, kind of have in common in terms of their nutrition?
Consistent quality of food.
Okay, that's good.
Without neurosis. So there is a concept called orthorexia nervosa.
Yep.
Which is when you're way too obsessive compulsive about the quality of food you're eating. Mm-hmm. The way I look at it is, you go to Christmas at grandma's house and she hand makes an apple pie, but because the apple pie is theoretically in quotes unhealthy, you can't have grandma's apple pie. Mm-hmm. That's a good definition of orthorexia nervosa. And so, but seeking out good quality food, not being so obsessive about it, but just consistency of eating day in, day out, good breakfast, good snack, good lunch, good snack, good dinner, and if required, another snack before bed, day in and day out. And that's the consistency that I see with most good athletes.
No, that makes sense. And I'm glad you mentioned, the orthorexia aspect. I do have Rennie McGregor, who wrote the book Orthorexia, as one of the recent podcast episodes. I will put links to that in the show notes for anyone who wants to learn more about that. But perfect example that you used there. And I think it's good you mentioned that, because professional runners, the runners at the top, they don't never have a bite of a donut because they think that it might damage their damage their running or their performance. They do allow that, and we do allow to have those things. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Thank you for kind of wrapping that up, and that really helps. Now, is there anything that you would like to share that you maybe haven't already about things that might have surprised you in your work that you've done? Maybe something you were researching on in nutrition and you kind of thought, wow, that isn't what I expected. Is there anything that people would find interesting as they love these kind of sciencey things?
The science 101 is to have hypothesis-driven research. And I was always trained by my PhD advisor, Lawrence Spreed, who's Mr. Caffeine. He's done a lot of caffeine research out of Canada, that you always have a good hypothesis. But I will also say that there's never been a study I've done where after the fact, you're like, oh, that worked a little differently than we thought, or that's kind of unique. So an example of one is Athletics Canada in April tends to go up. Every year there's a altitude training camp in April in Flagstaff. And so Athletics Canada's there, Australians are there, the Kiwis are there, the Brits are there, the Americans are there. And over the last few years, we've run a bunch of studies up there. And we have an iron one that'll come out soon, but Ida Hereka from Finland, I'm a co-supervisor, and she ran a great study up there in 2012 where we now have 4 papers out of it. And one part of that study was a questionnaire just on athletes' knowledge of what I'll say progressive periodized nutrition. And then another part of the study is where they actually did 1 week of dietary recording, appreciating that it can be fraught with some over and under reporting. Mm-hmm. And the thing that really surprised me was that the Canadian group on the knowledge and questionnaire of nutrition practice nailed it. They were awesome. And so for me as a practitioner, I was like, yes, I'm doing my job. But we have another paper where we then compared the knowledge of nutrition to the outcome and action of nutrition. And on some of the practices and action of nutrition, the story wasn't the same. Huh. And that, so then, I came off my little pedestal and I'm like, okay, I still have some work to do, because
so they know what they're doing. They know what they're supposed to be doing, but maybe not quite doing it as they should.
100% right. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. And that's a translation bit. That's an action bit. Like you can teach someone the knowledge, but if they don't have the skills or the desire to implement it, that's still a gap. So I look at knowledge, desire, and skills. Are you ready, willing, and able to implement something? And in a lot of instances, a lot of us will only say, oh, they have the knowledge. Okay, go. Well, maybe they don't know how to boil water. Okay, well, we'll start there, right? Right?
Yeah.
And the biggest mistakes us as practitioners, or I think coaches, can make is to assume. Never assume. Always check. Always ask. Assumption will get you into trouble pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yep, which we've heard that many times before in various different topics, and another one you can add to the list there. Okay, Trent, we are just going to take a moment to thank our sponsors, and we'll be back with the Running for Real 4. I've been talking about Body Health Perfect Amino for years now, and now I'm getting back into running again. Guess what the first product on my list to remember to start taking was? Yep, Body Health. All you need to do is take 5 to 10 Perfect Amino tablets. I like the tablets, but you could also use the XP powder at some point in your day, leaving a little time after you eat to make sure your body absorbs it correctly, and then it will get to work helping your body repair between training runs. Many of us have a goal of getting everything we need from our food, but let's be realistic. With our hectic lives, we barely have time to squeeze in a run, so making sure you stay on top of eating foods can be even more of a challenge. Perfect Amino contains the 8 essential amino acids the body needs to support and maintain all its systems working as it should, and the essential amino acids, are in the exact proportion needed for the body. There's a reason they have so many positive reviews on their website. I love them, especially when I have a big race in mind, and the idea of not being able to do it because I was under-recovered or even worse, injured, terrifies me. Hopefully you enjoy them too, and you can get 10% off at bodyhealth.com using coupon code TINA10. All right, Trent, just 4 more quick questions for you. The first one is usually a nutrition tip. I'm not sure if you're going to have anything to add for us that you haven't yet given, but maybe you've stored something up to share with us for this?
Yeah, I do. Maybe one last pitch for just the value of nutrition. I think at times it's very underappreciated, but let me put it this way. Elite athletes, the very elite athletes, might train 400 to 800 times a year, but you have to remember you eat 1,400 to 1,600 times a year. And so when you think about all those eating occasions and if you can get them right versus wrong, it has to make sense that nutrition will have an impact on what you're doing, and fueling matters, and the timing matters, and a lot of the things we've just talked about. And with any of those meals, I would first look at breakfast and make sure you're getting enough calories and enough protein as a really practical application.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. That's really helpful kind of wrap up there. What about a running for real moment from your running career, or, just something that maybe your wife has done? I don't know, whatever you want to share.
Yeah, So I'm a middle distance runner. Well, I was 20 years ago.
You still run now, though, yeah?
I still run. Oh, yeah. I try to get 5 days a week at least, and a long run on Sundays. But I've done a couple of marathons. My body's not built for the marathon, and I will say that probably one of the most real experiences I ever had was having to stop. I was in the top 200 at the New York City Marathon. My legs were completely trashed. My engine was fine. I was totally lucid and with it, but my legs are cramping, and having to stop 3 miles from the finish line in Central Park to stop and stretch and walk as the legs are cramping, to have people give you the courtesy golf clap, which is the last thing I just wanted to bury come on, man, they're clapping. I'm like, no, you don't understand. It was a real sobering moment, because I'm like, wow, I coach runners, I'm into nutrition. What did I do wrong here? This is pathetic. And I tell you, it gave me a real appreciation for the marathon runners out there, and that was a pretty real moment for me. And
what, looking back, would you say that you would have changed?
I didn't run enough on hard surfaces.
Okay. All right.
I was coming from Switzerland. I did almost all my mileage on these nice, beautiful, soft trails.
Well, especially then if you were in New York with the hills, kind of that pounding would have got you even more by that point. So yeah definitely. The marathon
is all about callousing your muscles for neuromuscular fatigue. Mm-hmm. Everyone thinks it's fueling. It is fueling a bit, but it's not the pace. It's just about whether your muscles after 35 kilometers can still produce force. And, if there's a way to do that other than having to run long, hard training on pavement, let me know. I've joked with people about smashing their quads with crowbars or some other way to callus their muscles. But that's the secret to marathon training. Yeah.
Well, you heard that, guys, listening from the expert in nutrition. He clearly said there that you guys thinking often it's nutrition. It may not be the case. It may just be that, you need to get more training in next time. So if you are struggling in the marathon, look at the training first and then maybe nutrition second if you do keep struggling. What about a high moment for you, Trent?
So we talked about earlier, I ended up herniating 2 discs my last year at Cornell, and I was off of running for 13 months. And I came back to Canada to start a master's at the University of Guelph, which is the best running school in Canada and a great academic program. And so I was off for 13 months, and then I needed to rehab another 6 months because I had eligibility left over. I did run for Guelph, and I would say that persistence to come back and to become an all Canadian again, I'm pretty proud of. It was a long, tedious road. I had many faster and better races earlier in my career, but I was just really proud of sticking it through and getting back to that level, or at least close to that level again.
Yeah, it just means more after knowing what you've been through to get back there. I definitely understand that. I've been there too. Finally, what do you tell yourself? I don't know how often you do race nowadays, but what did you tell yourself? What do you tell yourself when you're standing on the start line of a race?
Yeah, I don't know where I heard this quote. I like racing the first half of the race with your brain and the second half of the race with your heart.
That's great.
And so you got to be calculated early, but then late in the race, just shut that brain off and commit and race. And all you can do is leave it all out there on the course. You can't ask any more of yourself. And so that's something that I think about.
That is great. Thank you. And finally, I do ask my guests to send me a photo of them in a power pose, something you would do on the start line of a race, or maybe just if you were going to go give a talk somewhere. Will you send us a power pose?
I will. I'm a pretty easygoing guy. I can't think of a power pose. Maybe I'll send one of my 4-year-old. He does a lot of power poses right now. There you go.
We can do that. That's very unique. Yeah. I like that. Okay, we can have that. All right, Trent, where can people find out more about you if they are interested in kind of following what you're up to in the future?
Yeah, I think off my wife's website, there might be, she had a link to a website about 10 years ago, but we haven't updated that. I don't have time for those types of things. So just follow me on Twitter is probably the best spot. Yeah. T Stellingwerff. Yeah. T
Stellingwerff. All right. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Trent. This has been really interesting and I appreciate your time.
Thanks a lot. I enjoyed being on.
Other than Trent saying he doesn't like chocolate, I thought that was an awesome insight into what we should be doing to get our performance nutrition right. Interesting what he said about how runners are so different to other sports, but I guess that totally makes sense when you think about us. We know we can be very set in our ways when it comes to knowing how we want to do things. So you can find everything we talked about today in the show notes at tinamuir.com/episode 57. And as there are quite a few new listeners right now, I want to tell you that when I say tinamuir.com, that's spelled TINAMUIR. So for this episode, /episode 57. So remember to check out my Running for Real podcast series that I talked about at the beginning. Even if you're not interested in the nutrition one, maybe one of the others like mental training or marathon will more catch your eye. So next week, we are going to be talking to Ali Feller of Ali on the Run. Now, many of you know that me and Ali are friends through me being on her podcast a few weeks ago. But Ali has been through a lot in her running life and she has a great sense of humor. She recently announced that she is pregnant. Really excited for her and her husband. And I hope you enjoyed that episode with her. But I know many of you were looking forward to having her on my show, which is actually next week. And it's actually very close to her birthday. So it's a little birthday present to Ali. She's going to share her running journey, talk about Crohn's disease. I had no idea it was so crippling. So maybe this one will be eye-opening for you too, or even give you some advice if you are dealing with something similar. I hope you have a great week.
Thanks for listening to the Running for Real podcast. Be sure to check out tinamuir.com for show notes and even more helpful running information.